When a witness shares their experience with paranormal phenomena, they are often accused of seeking fame, money, or attention. But what if this witness was already rich and famous? What would be the point of fabricating a story that would make them look ridiculous, damage their credibility, or even harm their career? This is what makes today's case so convincing. Actor Telly Savalas had nothing to gain but everything to lose when he shared his terrifying experience with the supernatural. It wasn't about wealth or fame, as he already had both. It was simply a confession of something completely unexplainable, an incident that scared him for the rest of his life. In today's episode, we'll dive deep into the rarely discussed experience of a celebrity, one that will make your mind spin and your body shiver. The tragedy extended beyond a single encounter to another barely discussed event with strange links to the assassination of President John F. Kennedy. Buckle up for a wild ride as we explore Telly Savalas's ghostly encounters. If the name doesn't ring a bell, perhaps his face or voice will. Telly was a prominent actor known for his deep, raspy voice and calm demeanor. He played many roles but was best known as the tough, stern detective who hunted vampires in the crime series Kojak during the 1970s. But long before he became a household name, Telly went through a strange and disturbing experience that haunted him for life, in every sense of the word. He shared his story in an interview with the Australian TV show The Extraordinary on September 26, 1994. Much online discussion about this event stems from that interview, though the clip contains some informational gaps that have been filled through research in archives, newspaper reports, and other sources, which I will share with you later. But first, let's dive into his terrifying experience, an encounter with something or someone from another world, a ghostly meeting that took place along a road late at night. This incident that changed his life occurred in a residential neighborhood in New York City around 1958 or 1959. Telly was on a date with a beautiful young woman, having a great time, but the date ended and he dropped her off at her home. On his way back to his home in Long Island, it was late, around 2 a.m., and there was one thing he hadn't done: he hadn't checked his fuel level in time. When he looked at the gauge, he realized he was about to run out of gas. At that hour, traffic was light, so he pulled over to the side of the road and got out, wondering what to do next. Fortunately, he wasn't in the middle of nowhere. He could see a White Castle restaurant nearby. White Castle is a fast food chain in the U.S. that sells burgers and shakes, often open 24/7. So he walked there, went inside, and asked an employee if there was a gas station nearby that was open. The man said, "Yes, there is one, but you'll have to walk through the woods to get there. Once you cross that forest, you'll reach Grand Central Parkway, then take that to Cross Island Parkway, and there you'll find a gas station that will solve your problem." Relieved, Telly thanked the man and went outside. He could see the wooded area near the road. Luckily it wasn't a dense forest but just a small wooded patch. He headed there and started walking toward the trees. While walking, Telly hoped the station would also sell empty gas cans because he didn't have one in his car. This is when everything changed. All it took were a few words. Telly was about to enter the wooded area when he heard someone speaking. The voice was strange, high-pitched, possibly feminine, saying, "I'll give you a ride." Telly turned to see where the voice was coming from. He assumed the speaker was on foot because he didn't hear any car sounds, only the voice. But when he turned, he saw a Cadillac parked on the road. Strange, as he hadn't noticed it before or heard it approaching. Sitting behind the wheel was a man wearing a white suit. The man repeated, "I'll give you a ride." Telly said the man's voice was very distinctive, very high-pitched, and described it as feminine, but it was okay. It was strange that this man was offering help, but Telly desperately needed it, so he was genuinely grateful. He approached the car, leaned in, and said, "Listen, that's very kind of you, thank you, but I actually need to get to the gas station." The man motioned for him to get in, saying he was happy to take him there and bring him back. So Telly got in, full of gratitude, and the strange, polite man, despite his oddness, drove him to the station. During the ride, the driver talked to him. Telly described the conversation as pleasant, except for the eerie tone in the man's voice. Checking the street names and locations Telly mentioned allows us to approximate the gas station's location, which likely still exists. Grand Central Parkway and Cross Island Parkway intersect near the edge of Queens Village, New York. Maps show several stations in the area. Eventually, they arrived, and Telly got out, ready to buy gas cans and fill them up. But then he realized he didn't have enough money. The strange driver noticed this and said, "I'll lend you $1. Yes, $1. Gas was cheaper back then. Telly didn't want to ask for money. At that time, he had been working in radio since the end of World War II, hosting a program for the U.S. State Department called Voice of America, then moving on to a show called The Coffee House in New York City. So he wasn't broke or anything like that, but in that moment, he truly was out of cash. He had nothing, and if he didn't accept the stranger's kindness, he'd be stuck that night. So he said, "I'll take your money, but please write down your address and phone number so I can mail it back. I'm very embarrassed." The driver agreed, gave him the $1 and the cans, and everything went smoothly. The stranger waited patiently in the car. After paying, Telly got back in. The driver started the engine and headed toward Telly's parked car. During the drive, the strange man said something utterly random and out of context. He said, "I know," then mentioned someone's name. "I know so and so." Telly never revealed the real name in the interview, but it seemed to be a real person. Perhaps Telly was sensitive about the man's identity. After some research, the man's identity seems to have become clear, but we will discuss that shortly. The important point is that at that moment, Telly had no idea who the stranger was talking about or naming. So he said, "Who is that? I don't know that name." The driver said the person was a baseball player for the Boston Red Sox. A very random topic, since neither of them had talked about baseball at any point. So it was strange for the driver to suddenly claim to know this player personally, whom Telly had never heard of. It was embarrassing, but nothing more. Telly said the way the driver spoke about the player, his tone and behavior, was, in Telly's words, scary. That's when fear gripped him. Eventually, they reached Telly's car, which was a great relief. I'm sure Telly was eager to get back home to Long Island. He stopped, got out, and started putting gas in the tank. But he said in the interview that he couldn't start the car without a push from the strange man. This point raises some suspicion and confusion. Usually, when a car runs out of gas and you refill the tank, you can simply start the car again without needing a push. So why did Telly's car need a push? Is this proof the whole story is made up? Well, when looking into American cars from the late 1950s, you'll find that these old cars had different fuel delivery systems. There are several reasons why Telly's car would need a push, unlike modern cars. For example, modern cars have electric fuel pumps that activate as soon as you turn the key, but cars from the 1950s used mechanical pumps. The mechanism only worked when the engine was running, meaning it needed cranking or pushing to get the fuel flowing again. So, it made perfect sense that Telly asked the strange man to push his car. The man agreed, got out of his own car, walked over to Telly's car, and together they pushed it while Telly turned the ignition. Eventually, the car came back to life. As soon as the engine started, Telly turned to the stranger, filled with gratitude, and said, "I really appreciate your help. The lift, the money, the push. Thank you so much." He was truly grateful, and if you were in his place, you would have been too. They said their goodbyes, and Telly drove off back to his home in Long Island. Except for the fact that the stranger gave off an extremely eerie impression, especially his voice. Telly thought on the way home about how kind and noble it was for someone to do what that man had done. The next morning, Telly got up to go to work at the radio station. In the afternoon, he happened to pick up a copy of the New York Journal-American, a newspaper that was published between 1937 and 1966, which makes the timeline accurate. He opened it, flipped through the pages, and was suddenly shocked by one of the stories. A baseball player in his 20s had died. Telly couldn't believe what he was reading. The name mentioned was the same one the stranger had told him about the night before. Telly shuddered upon reading the news and described the experience as frightening. He returned home and spoke to his mother. "Listen, this is scary. I met a strange man last night who said he knew this player, but the player is actually dead." His mother was open to the idea of supernatural phenomena and said, "Listen, there is a hidden world. Strange things happen. Maybe the person you met was some kind of spirit or ghost." Telly pondered this chilling possibility. Then suddenly, he remembered something important. The money. He owed the driver $1, and the man had asked for his address so he could send it to him. He rushed to the clothes he had worn that night, searched the pockets, and found the paper the man had written on. It had a name and address written in the stranger's handwriting. It read, "Mr. James Cullen." Next to the address, Mr. Cullen had also written a phone number. Telly was extremely curious. He picked up the phone and dialed the number. The call connected to a place called Jimmy's Bar. What you're about to hear is a reenactment of what Telly said happened during that phone call, and it's truly astonishing. "Hello, Jimmy's. Hello. Can I speak with Mr. Cullen, please?" "Who? Mr. Cullen? Who's calling?" "Please, I just want to speak to Mr. Cullen." "He's not here." "Oh. When do you expect him back?" "Who are you?" "I was with Mr. Cullen last night. He gave me this number and said I could reach him here." "Listen, you creep. I don't know what you're talking about. I just want to speak to James Cullen. He helped me. You're talking about my husband, and he's been dead for 2 years." She hung up. Telly sat there, staring at the phone, unable to believe it. This can't be true. It can't be. Still, he was too stunned to let it go. He called her back, and eventually, he convinced Mrs. Cullen that he was being sincere. "I met a man named James Cullen. He gave me this exact number. Please," he said, "can we meet? I need to understand what's happening." She finally agreed, and she came from Boston to meet him in New York. Clearly, she was taking the matter seriously. When they met, he told her everything that had happened that night and even more details, including one particularly strange one. James Cullen had been wearing a white suit. When he said that, Mrs. Cullen was visibly shaken. "Really? A white suit?" "Yes." "Why?" he asked. She looked at him and said, "That's what he was wearing when we buried him." The atmosphere at that moment must have been electric. Telly took a moment to absorb what he was hearing. Then he remembered the slip of paper James had written on. He had told her about it during the phone call, so they agreed she would bring a letter from her late husband to compare the handwriting. She brought a letter that James had written her while serving in the army. He had signed it Jimmy, the name she used to call him. The handwriting matched perfectly. It was chilling. Every detail in Telly's story matched, except for one important difference. When Telly described James's distinctive voice, he couldn't help but mention, "Listen, the man in the car had a high-pitched, tense voice. Honestly, it sounded almost feminine." Mrs. Cullen shook her head and said, "Well, that can't be right. Jimmy had a deep voice, always. Just like yours." Telly Savalas was famous for his deep, commanding voice. This was puzzling. Everything else matched, except for this. He then asked her, "How did James Cullen die?" She took a deep breath and said, "He took his own life." Telly was deeply saddened to hear that, but then shuddered when he asked, "How did he do it?" She said, "He shot himself, right here. Through the throat." For Telly, this was a mentally overwhelming and truly terrifying experience. He said he wasn't naturally inclined to believe in the supernatural. His mother was interested in such things, but he wasn't a superstitious person. Until that night. Until that moment. He later expressed his feelings in an interview, saying, "That first experience that night was particularly interesting because there are many legends about ghostly hitchhikers. Someone picks up a traveler, then later learns that the person they picked up was actually dead. It's like giving a ghost a ride, so to speak. But this case is completely different. It seems the dead man was the one driving the car. And not only that, this ghost wasn't fleeting. He stayed, helped physically, handed me real money that was accepted at a gas station, and wrote his name and address on a piece of paper." This figure seemed to have existed fully and tangibly for just long enough to help Telly. And in a chilling twist, this would not be the last time Telly encountered this strange man. What happens in the next incident is truly insane. But before we tell you that story, don't forget that there was a third man in this tale. The baseball player that James Cullen had talked about that night. So, who was that baseball player? Upon investigation and research into the roster of the Boston Red Sox during that period, no player in his 20s was found to have died in 1958 or 1959. However, it appears that there was a player during that era. The team was in their 20s when he passed away, but earlier, Harry Agonis had played with the Boston Red Sox from 1954 to 1955. In May of 1955, Harry was diagnosed with pneumonia. He returned to play with the Red Sox for 2 games against Chicago, but when the team arrived in the next city, where their third game was to be held, Harry experienced difficulty breathing. He said he felt congestion in his chest and couldn't stop coughing. He was sent back to the hospital for further testing, and unfortunately, his condition worsened significantly. Harry Agonis died on June 27, 1955. So, he did not die in 1958 or 1959. Does this mean that Telly Savalas was mistaken about the year? Remember, he said he saw a newspaper report about the death of a baseball player the day after the encounter. So why would a newspaper report on an athlete's death 3 or 4 years after it happened? That honestly doesn't seem logical. True, in the interview on the Australian TV program, Telly appeared unsure about the exact date of the incident. So, is it possible that the ghost car ride happened in 1955? Some writers on paranormal phenomena insist it must have happened then because that was the year of Harry Agonis's death. But there's one detail that challenges this theory. Research into Telly Savalas's marriage history shows he married his college sweetheart, Catherine Nicolaides, in 1948, and he was still married to her in 1955. This is important. Do you recall what Telly said he was doing that strange night? He said he was on a date. Why would he openly admit to being on a date with a woman while still married to Catherine at the time? It's possible, but it seems unlikely. In fact, he remained married to her until 1957, then later married Marilyn Gardner in 1960. This means that Telly Savalas was divorced and single in 1957, 1958, and 1959, so it's very likely he was dating during those years, especially since he mentioned a small detail in the interview. After that strange night, he went home and talked to his mother about the incident. Some research reveals that he was indeed living with his mother during the years of his divorce. Everything lines up. It seems he got the years right, and that what happened to him took place in 1958 or 1959. But the question remains, Why would a New York newspaper write about a Boston player years after his death? You might think that's a potential weakness in the story. Well, it might seem so, until some people dug deeper into the American newspaper archives. And what they found was eerie. Although Harry Agonis died in 1955, multiple articles appeared in different newspapers during 1958 and 1959 with his name in the headline. Why? Because after his death, several tribute events were held in his honor, and those articles were reporting on the late baseball player and how his example continued to inspire others even long after his passing. In other words, it's entirely plausible that Telly Savalas came across an article about Harry Agonis's death even in 1958 or 1959. But that hardly solves the mystery or clears the confusion, does it? We still have these three men: Telly Savalas, the famous living man residing in New York; James Callahan, the dead man with a grieving widow; and Harry Agonis, a popular sports legend from Lynn, Massachusetts, who had passed on. Well, there are connections between them when you look into the details. For example, was it a mistake that James Callahan's wife traveled from Boston? It's reasonable to think that James Callahan also lived there before his death. Harry Agonis played for the Boston Red Sox and was a star football player at Boston University before that. In fact, Agonis chose to live in the Boston area not only because of its sports scene but also to be close to his widowed mother. So there's a strong geographic connection between the two deceased men. Perhaps they even knew each other in real life. But what makes this strange is that Callahan spoke in the present tense. If Callahan had known Agonis in real everyday life in Boston, wouldn't he have said, "I knew Harry Agonis, the ballplayer who's no longer with us"? But instead, he said, "I know Harry Agonis," in the present tense. So did these two men know each other in life, or did they somehow become acquainted in the afterlife? It's also interesting to note that both Telly Savalas and Harry Agonis were of Greek descent. Is this just a random coincidence, or does it explain why Callahan mentioned his dead Greek friend, because the new friend standing in front of him was also Greek? Who knows? Either way, there's another part of this story that hardly anyone talks about, but it's a disturbing part, connected to spiritual possession. Telly had shared the story of the mysterious driver at different times in his life. It seems he talked about it in an episode of The Michael Parkinson Show in the UK, for instance, on September 20, 1974. But currently, no copy of that interview is available. Some reports suggest that he might have mentioned Harry Agonis by name in that interview, but it's not confirmed. As I mentioned earlier, the primary source of this story, and of most internet posts about it, is his interview on September 26, 1993, with the Australian show The Extraordinary. Sadly, Telly passed away just a few months after that interview, in January 1994. After his death, The Extraordinary decided to produce another tribute episode for him. They wanted to honor him after his passing, so they re-aired the segment about the ghost driver, but also included some additional unseen footage of him. During the original taping, Telly had shared the story of his roadside encounter, and that seemed to be the end of it. The crew began turning off the cameras, but the show's producers were so deeply moved by the story, and by his sincerity in telling it, that they couldn't stop themselves from asking more and more questions about it. They were utterly fascinated, as you would be if you'd heard it firsthand. And as they continued talking with him, they began to realize that this wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. So they pressed him for more, and he finally agreed to tell them. They turned the cameras back on and listened. He said that a few years after the car incident, Telly was playing golf with some friends in the San Fernando Valley, California, in November 1963. There were three of them: Telly Savalas, game show host Dennis James, who at the time was a panelist on an NBC game show called Your First Impression, and the third friend, TV producer Merrill Heater. The three men were playing a round of golf at Caballero, a beautiful country club. It was built just a few years earlier, in 1957. As they approached the tee box for the sixth hole, Telly heard a voice from afar, a voice that made his blood run cold. He turned around to see who it was, and saw a man standing on top of a hill. The man was calling out to him, "Telly! Telly!" Telly admitted in that interview that at that moment, he began to tremble, because he knew the voice. It was horrifyingly familiar. It was the same man from that night a few years back. The same high-pitched, eerie tone that had terrified him in the middle of the night was now echoing across the luxurious, beautiful golf course, calling out his name. The man didn't come down from the hill or say anything else. He just shouted, "Telly!" followed by the strangest sentence. "Did you hear what happened in Dallas?" Telly said, "What?" Then turned to Dennis, the game show host he was with, and asked him, "Dennis, did you hear what he just said?" Dennis replied, "I can hear him yelling, but I'm not sure what he's talking about." Telly figured it was just some random statement about something going on in Dallas. The three men decided to keep playing, but Telly was genuinely scared. He knew this was the man from the car that night. But why was he here now? And what was he talking about? After playing a few more holes, they decided to head to the clubhouse for some food. They sat at a table and noticed the TV was on. They ordered their food. Then, suddenly, the TV program they were watching, a soap opera called As the World Turns, was interrupted. It was Walter Cronkite, the news anchor who became known as the Voice of America for a certain generation. He was announcing the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas, Texas. Telly sat there in shock. So did everyone else. The news of the president's assassination was a huge shock in its own right, of course. But the strange man on the hill had shouted at them about it roughly 90 minutes earlier, according to Telly's estimate. Here's the timeline of events. 10:30 a.m. Pacific Time, JFK was shot in Dallas. 10:34 a.m., CBS interrupted As the World Turns with Walter Cronkite's first bulletin about the shooting. 11 a.m., JFK was pronounced dead, but this was not yet made public. 11:08 a.m., Walter Cronkite announced Kennedy's death to the public. Telly said the strange man spoke about Dallas at around 9:10 a.m., over an hour before the actual shooting. That's a stunning claim. What's especially interesting is how Telly ended that extra part of the interview. He admitted that James Cullen had appeared to him at other times as well. In fact, Telly grew uncomfortable and didn't want to talk about it further. The producers had already gotten him to share the JFK detail, so he said no more. And then, a few months later, Telly Savalas passed away from bladder cancer, in January 1994. He had been diagnosed back in 1989, 5 years earlier. But despite early detection, he delayed seeking treatment, which allowed the cancer to progress. His father had also died from bladder cancer. His older brother had undergone treatment and encouraged him to do the same, but he didn't. He ignored the early warning signs, blood in his urine. All three men, Telly, his father, and brother, were heavy smokers, the leading cause of bladder cancer. Telly died at the Sheraton Universal Hotel in Los Angeles. He had been living there. He died just one day after his 72nd birthday. The screen legend, known for his warmth, his voice, and his calm demeanor, was gone. But when you think about his incredible story of the man in the Cadillac, you can't help but wonder. Does a person's connection to our world truly end when they die? His gravestone bears a quote from Aristotle. "It is time for me to go, I to die, and you to live. Which of us goes to the better lot is known to none but God." It never seemed like Telly was trying to exploit this experience for fame or money. He already had those. He simply told the story as he remembered it. Because sometimes, when something unexplainable happens, you have no choice but to acknowledge it and share it. even if it's so shocking that you can't share the whole story with the world. I wonder if he shared that part about JFK because he sensed his time was near, and he was finally ready to be more open about it. I don't know. All I know is that Telly Savalas was a man made famous for solving mysteries as Kojak, yet he remained haunted by one real mystery from his own life. What do you think of this mystery? Share your thoughts and theories in the comments below. And finally, remember this advice. Next time you're driving, make sure your gas tank is full. Thanks for watching. God bless you. If you made it this far into the video, let me know in the comments.